First, I was very pleased to know that I would go second in place of having a banker do that, but I learned that bankers are not easy to follow either. What I would like to have you do is to say hello to John Burroughs for me, if you're going to see him today. I remember an incident. I'm going to depart for this incident. We had a bit of a difficulty right at first finding a place to put ourselves. There was a community building which the Public Housing Authority allowed us to purchase with $1, but all we had was the basement area. The upper area was used for social activities. But behind that was a parking lot, and that was probably the greatest place to begin. That was the center of our compound of activity. And it was C.L. Davis's liquor store that provided in the basement a place for our administrative headquarters. Well, this didn't set too well with some of the ministers in the community. And they called a meeting and invited me to attend. And they were all ready to tell me why they didn't want me to do that or us to do that. And they hadn't gotten into their second sentence before John Burroughs brought 3 ladies into the room. They were mothers of the community. And the spokesperson for this little delegation said it very succinctly and quickly. Reverend, we believe these people are here to help our children, and we don't much care where they put their administrative headquarters. End of the story. Well, of course, we had great help. I don't even need to say that. You just heard him talk about it. We had great help in advice, in succinct ways of dealing with certain kinds of problems. We had a political savvy group. Uriel was a remarkably mature, clever, dignified, and I would have to say, understanding, wise person. I think he was the only member of your family that, however, that didn't go to college. All the rest of you did. He had sickle cell anemia when he was a teenager. And all the time he was working with us, he had this problem. It wasn't a minor problem. Great pain, great issues of health. Sometimes hard to understand how he managed. But he did. And he was our advisor and much of our intelligence as well. Then, of course, you already mentioned it, a marvelous social worker who was trained and who was also a member of the community, Mary Wilkins. She selected the parents to work in our preschool co-ops where we could put the children in the co-op efforts of the parents, and everybody could learn from everybody else. And the parent co-op activities were more and more the product of the ladies who came from the homes. They got a credential from that, which allowed them to be hired in as aides in preschools throughout the city. I think 51 of them from our original work, which was begun, of course, by Todd Risley and his colleagues initially. But I do want you to know that the success of that project from its very beginning was in substantial degree due to the advice we got, the help we got, the activities that we were prompted to undertake, the priorities that we come to respect. How can you imagine that, really, from the beginning? We had a site visit for professional site visit from Washington that came in 1967. It was our first program project. We had before that 3 kind of auxiliary grants from another grant that we had at the time. And part of the agenda of this site visit, which was done in Turner House, was to have Chester and his colleagues meet with the reviewing committee. And all the rest of us cleared the room. And when that site visit was terminated and the review staff began to file out, one of my friends from UCLA said, "I'll trade communities with you." I think what he meant was much more than that, which I overheard said in some of the subsequent meetings. They said, the meeting with people of the community was the highlight of our visit. How can you fail when you've got helpers like that? Well, there were a number of times that were crisis times. John Burris, for instance, helped us at another time. There was a OEO review committee, neighborhood committee. I don't remember quite what it was called now, but we were not allowed to submit applications to the OEO groups without the consent of these advisors from the community, and they were primarily white people, the people that collected monies from the drives and so on, the socially approved kind of things. But there were also a mixture of community people, including John Burris. And the subject of the evening was, were we going to be allowed to submit our applications? We weren't part of the OEO, we weren't part of the establishment, the establishment for doing things in the community that related to health and so forth. After a considerable amount of discussion, John very ingenuously said, maybe we should put this to a vote. Just that simple thing. And it passed. And so we were in. We were allowed henceforth to do things that would meet our tests and the tests of the community and the expanded. I would like to say a few words about Collingwood. Harris Collingwood. His brother, I think, was Charles Collingwood, the national network announcer. And he was rector Collingwood of the St. Paul's Episcopal Church. And he took it upon himself to help us get Turner House funded. They had a kind of a community desire to do that in their church for quite some time. Reverend Turner Bishop Turner was a highly respected man for many years in the community. But we needed the money from the Episcopal Diocese of Kansas to do that. And if you've never dealt with a diocesan fiscal committee, you really haven't lived in the world of finance. They were not about to give us that money because there were other priorities around the state. But Harris managed to have the National Fiscal Diocese Advisor attend the day before, and also the day that the diocese committee was going to meet. This national advisor was a kind of a small, not very formidable looking man. But he came to see me in the office over at the medical center where we had laboratories at the time, and I thought he was going to be a hard sell. But about halfway into our discussion, I realized that he was seducing me. And I must tell you that mutual seduction is the most powerful reinforcement system. Well, I was asked by Harris to attend the discussion at something like 10:30 in the morning. And I showed up very promptly at that time, and this committee had been meeting for a couple of hours before that. And I could see they were a little bit distraught, and they were tired and disgruntled, and they were not a very good audience that suddenly I found myself in front of. I was asked to say a few words, which I did. And I don't know how to explain this, but that was the easiest speech I ever gave in my life. I barreled on through why I thought that Turner House was an important project, what it would mean to the community, what it would mean to the activities of the researchers in the community, among all the rest. Later on, Harris said, "Dick, you're the best con man Vance overheard that, and he pulled that one on me at my 80th birthday party." Well, you see, we were all imbued with the same kind of a spirit about this. That's what it did. I mean, it cut across all of our identities, all of our roles, all of our community roles. We just did it together. That's really what I wanted to say to you. That was the spirit of the early years. Of course, there were a number of things that happened that were entirely fortuitous, and I've got to mention the most significant of all. That was the sudden emergence at Juniper Gardens of about 8 people who were recruited from the University of Washington in Seattle and who emerged as key figures in the research program there. One, of course, was Vance, Betty Hart, Don Bushell. Now, he didn't come from Washington, he came from St. Louis. Almost Washington, but not the University of St. Louis. Of course, Vance, Risley, and Ron Wolf, and so forth. They all, how did that happen? Shortly before that, there had been a moment people had asked me, what kind of a research team would you like to have? And quite buoyantly and optimistically, I said, I would like to have a research team like the one out at the University of Washington, Seattle. It was called what? They had a project.
Child Development Center.
All right. I think we had a little different name for it in Kansas, but anyway. I said I would like a team like that. Well, one morning, Francis Horowitz, who was the acting chairman of a small beginning department called the Department of Human Development and Family Life, came to me and she said, "Dick, I think we could recruit Don Baer if we go about it right." And of course I knew who Don Baer was, but I had never met him. It was the Rainier School. She said, "I know that he's going to be recruited. They're going to try to recruit him to the University of Texas. Of course, that's going to be difficult because they pay very high salaries down there." So my job was to go to the Vice Chancellor and the Dean and to convince them that we should recruit Don Baer. And so I put it in the pluperfect tense. I said, this is the most important deal you ever will have made. Well, they agreed to it. And of course, Don had his direct relationship to all these people. He wanted to get them back together again for purposes that I never quite completely understood. They were wanting to leave where they were. So Don named them, selected them, The vice chancellor and the dean found the positions for them. I found half of the money for them, and we made the deal. And they came, and they organized themselves into a formidable research team, literally overnight. Within 3 years, they were publishing materials that were at the top of the chart for reprint designation purposes. It became a program overnight. Well, so did the department that they came to on the campus. Within 5 years, they were in the top 5 of the country. What about the Bureau of Child Research? It was very hungry for top talent at that time. We were on the verge of competing for a national center with constructed buildings. It was a miracle that all of those coalescing forces happened at the same time. And so here we were, all winners over a opportunity that was too good to turn down, even by a very poor university at that time. I've called that a cluster of miracles. And I have a manuscript for that, and if you'd like to see it, I'll see that you get it. It would be well to look at, even now. Well, what we were able to do, you see, was to qualify very soon for a program grant, a 5-year program grant, training grants, all kinds of demonstration grants. We were in the top echelon of leading edge research teams in the country. From 1965, when Vance and the group came, to 1967, in that short period of time, we were regarded in the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development as their outstanding program project research activity. Well, there's very little more I want to say about the beginning. It was an adventure. It was important. It was something that was apparently doable. You'd ought to look at some of the academic literature that flowered from that work. It was very much a leading edge, I would say, program for all these different purposes. How can you be so lucky? How can you be so fortunate? How can you be so fulfilled? How can you feel so important? And can you imagine the absolute joy I feel looking out at this group this morning? I hope you heard me say that.